Hello, my name is Elizabeth Koscielny and I am an Indiana State LPN to BSN nursing student. Today we're going to be talking about a population at risk, and that population is veterans and the suicide risk among them. Now, before we get started, I would like everyone to pause this video and go down to the bottom and find the link where the pre-test is located. Take that test now to test your knowledge before we get into the subject, and then once we're done, we're going to take a post-test to see how much we've learned. Alright, and now that you're back, let's go over our learning objectives for this presentation. First, we will identify warning signs that are associated with suicide. Next, we'll identify the prevalence of suicide among the veteran population. Then we'll understand contributing and protective factors for suicide among the veteran population. We'll explore some successful interventions to decrease the prevalence of suicide. And finally, identify helpful resources for support in the community. So first, to look at suicide overall. Suicide is one of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Some warning signs of suicide include the presence of a suicidal plan or how to execute it, the means to get a weapon or a way to execute your plan, expressing feelings of hopelessness, and any kind of preparatory behavior such as giving away your items, writing out letters. Now, to look at suicide among the veteran population. It's estimated that at least 20 veterans a day commit suicide. Almost 18% of all the annual suicides that occur in the U.S. are attributed to military members. Over the last 10 years, veteran suicide rates have increased. And suicide rates are higher among veterans immediately following separation from the service and tend to decrease as that time goes on. Active duty service members are more at risk than reserve members, and this is theorized to be because reserve members typically have a connection to the civilian world even while they're in the service. And veterans between the ages of 18 to 39 years old are more at risk to die from suicide as compared to their counterparts at 40 and 49 years old. So what are some contributing factors for the increased risk of suicide among veterans? In one study by Kopax et al. In 2018, veterans that self-rated a worsened spiritual health were more likely to commit suicide than those who did not. Some other factors that also contributed to increased suicide risk is combat exposure, guilt associated with serving, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and TBI or traumatic brain injury. Mental health conditions like anxiety, OCD, and depression, as well as substance abuse, all also contribute as well. There are also a few non-modifiable factors, which means that there's factors that they cannot control themselves. So if a service member has a prior family history of suicide, the exposure level to trauma, their gender, and their race can all impact their risk of suicide. So what are some protective factors against suicide? In veterans that have high levels of social integration, they have a lower chance of suicide. This basically means the extent of their social ties and connection with a social network. So basically how involved they are with their family and friends. Being married and having a family is also a protective factor against suicide. Involvement with religious or community organizations also help to protect them, as well as adequate problem-solving skills and coping mechanisms. So what are some interventions? Well, the first intervention would be pastoral care. This highlights the importance of spiritual health as evidenced by the previous study. By having access to pastoral care and pastors available to the service members, it can help to decrease their risk of suicide. Another one is called lethal means safety. This is a strategy that works to limit access to weapons and medications that are commonly used in suicide. So that means to limit their access to like controlled substances, guns, anything like that. The next one is called home, and this is an intervention that's designed specifically for service members. And this happens once the service member is in the inpatient setting and then is discharged, because once the patient is discharged from an inpatient facility, their risk of suicide increases. And this is because they might not have the follow-up care that they need. The 4 levels involved with home are: the first is to meet the patient on the inpatient floor and introduce yourself. The next step is to do a telephone follow-up call 1 day after discharge. Then they do a home visit within the first week, and they do ongoing follow-up check-ins either through the phone or with home visits until care is obtained after they're discharged. This has been shown to make the service member more likely to engage in follow-up care and decrease their risk of suicide. Another successful intervention is called problem-solving therapy. Problem-solving therapy focuses on building their problem-solving skills as well as their critical thinking skills. It also helps to build successful coping mechanisms. By doing this, it makes them more resilient and less likely to engage in suicidal ideation. Another intervention that's equally as important is developing a safety plan. This can be done in an inpatient setting, but also within an outpatient setting or even in the home itself. Basically, the safety plan goes through a list of different stages and ideas that could be happening with a suicidal patient. So the first part of the plan would be a warning sign of a crisis. And then next, it would be to focus on coping skills or how to build coping skills to deal with that crisis. Next, it would be distractions to help support, or distractions that would take the patient's focus away from focusing on the crisis. And then finally, to find support as well as a safe environment for them. So what are some additional resources in our community? The first one is called the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and this is a phone number that you can call 24/7 whenever need be. Their phone number is 1-800-273-8255. Next, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, as well as the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, provide helpful resources and tips, as well as different areas in the community that can help. And lastly, the Mighty has suicide prevention resources. This might be especially helpful because it provides personalized accounts and stories from people who have suffered from different mental health conditions and those who might have possibly attempted suicide in the past as well. For all of our references, let me know, and I'd like for everyone, once this video is over, to go down to the bottom and take the post test to test your knowledge. Thank you for listening.